time to talk bass. Oh, I'm sorry. It's time to talk about the bass. It's also time to climb inside the mind of another fine musician. You're listening to Music Student 101. Today's guest, bassist Aaron Branson. Your hosts, Jeremy Burns and Matthew Scott Phillips.
All right, so I have some crazy news.
What's that?
We are recording and releasing this episode in July of 2017, which means this is our 1 year anniversary.
Wow, really?
The introductory episode was released on July 17th of 2016.
I can't believe it's been a year.
I can't either. We've covered a lot of ground.
Yes, we have.
25th episode is...
And we're really just getting started. There's so much more to talk about.
I know. But we have plenty to talk about today. You know why?
Why is that?
I think at some point we might have mentioned that we're both bass players, Matt.
We are both bass players. In fact, we mentioned that just about every episode.
We do mention it in just about every episode. And of course, we enjoy it so we had to even make our own bass crazy intro music for this episode. But that features yet a third bassist. And that would be Birmingham's own Aaron Branson.
Yay! Hello.
Welcome, Aaron.
Thank you.
It is great to have you here, man. And I think most of our listening audience saw this coming a mile away. Today, we are talking about the bass. Myself and Matt will dig deep with a fellow bassist, Aaron, and we're going to cover a lot of ground. But first, let's talk a little bit about this intro music. So what you guys heard was I decided, in true Spinal Tap fashion, I wanted to have a bass trio. You don't get to hear those very often.
No.
And because the one bassist normally has one role and plays one part, for this I wanted to try and feature a few different techniques and styles so that our parts could stand out a bit from each other. So what I did was I kind of laid down that funky kind of slap line, you know. Matt covered the chords, kind of like the rhythm guitarist might do it, and then we just let Aaron do his thing on the solo.
Yeah.
And you tore it the hell up, man.
Oh, thanks. It was a lot of fun. Like you said, that rarely happens. And I don't know if there's a reason that rarely happens, but just something fun and different to do. To actually play with other bass players, for one.
That's right, man.
Because in our world, we never get to play together.
We really don't.
And we'd probably get along best with each other.
Right, yeah.
It'd probably be the most stable, drama-free band.
Yeah,
right.
Ever, right?
Yeah. No drama, no good. Gotta have some drama.
I think that's the only reason I really try to do guitar gigs is so I can play with you guys.
I can play with good bass players.
Right.
Yeah, the reason I chose you, Aaron, is because I've been following you throughout the years. Myself and Matt were in the same school system as you went through, the UAB music department. And
You guys were just a handful of years ahead of me.
Yeah, so we got to see you kind of emerge on the scene, you know,
Right.
and come a very long way today. And we'll talk a little bit about what you're doing. But let me just say, I've seen you perform, and you are a bassist's bassist.
Nice. That's maybe the best compliment I've had all day.
Thank you. And the day is young.
Right?
So let me just ask you a few questions. We're just going to start asking you some questions here. You ready?
Right, cool, man, yeah.
Just light into it. Where are you musically right now, in terms of the projects you've been involved in and some of the things you've done?
Well, I had my original band for a while, and I was pretty proud of that. We never really did too much with it. It was a kind of an artsy, instrumental, fusion, riffy, whatever, all over the place kind of band. And
Original?
Original, yeah. It was mostly my compositions, a few collaborations in there, but I never really set out to to really make it big with that or anything, but I'm proud of making myself do like an album's worth of material, even though it never really turned into an album, or and we did some cool shows. We opened for Snarky Puppy. That was really cool.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
And I once upon a time had Mike League's phone number and he had mine, and that was really cool. And other than that, I've just done all the regular stuff. I've played with lots of cover bands that have been successful for cover bands. Plenty of weddings and corporate events and just all the working musician things that you may tend to take for granted, but for someone who's just starting out, they may look at that and say, well, that's really cool.
Absolutely.
You're making a living. You're playing the bass for money, and that's cool. And I've played for a few cool artists over the years. I played for Matthew Mayfield for a while, and that was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And then, of course, most recently, been working with the Black Jacket Symphony for quite some time, and we've done a lot with that. We're playing our first arena shows this year.
Really?
So that'll be a milestone for me. I'll be playing my first arena shows in just a few months.
Well, I've not played an arena show yet.
Yeah, me either. I was going to say I can't imagine.
Yeah, it's gonna be surreal. It's gonna be a lot of fun.
What's it going to feel like when your bass is rattling out amongst the arena?
Right? Yeah, I don't know. It's gonna feel really good.
You have to tell us about that.
Yeah. I'll be more than willing to talk all about it, I'm sure.
And this is with the Black Jacket Symphony. We should
Yeah,
tell them
yeah.
who they are, because we actually did an episode on playing with cover bands, but the Black Jacket Symphony is really so much more than that, isn't it? I mean, how would you describe what the Black Jacket Symphony is?
What do they like to call it? The symphony for our generation.
Oh, okay. Wow. Fascinating.
What I always said, you wouldn't go see the Alabama Symphony Orchestra play and play someone else's music and call them a cover band, right?
Interesting point.
I think there's a certain implication that we sort of rise above personally. Not that there's anything wrong with cover bands. I
No, of course not.
play in cover bands all the time. and I think
We've all made
there's
money. In that way.
But I do think it's I dare not say a step above that, but a step aside from that.
Well,
it's sort of a different thing.
You guys have light show. And you learn it note per note. It's like a kind of tribute. It's more of a tribute.
Yeah,
maybe?
it's like in between a cover and a tribute, right? Like a tribute band, like you sort of think of that, and it connotes a bunch of guys dressing the part, and they're not recreating. They're recreating the show, not the album. So our focus is not so much on the look and all that, and how they did it live. Our focus is on doing it the way we want to do it, but staying true to the original recording, right? So what we do is we'll take an iconic album and play it note for note, sound for sound. So we'll do Dark Side of the Moon front to back, and we'll have all the little dialogues and all the little bells and whistles that you hear on the album that even the original bands never did live.
Yeah.
So we're trying to recreate studio magic in a live setting. And that's what sets us apart. And that's what I think makes us so cool. And there's really an art to that that's pretty nuts. And it's sort of like pulling a rabbit out of the hat. There's a lot of sleight of hand involved, and there's a lot of trickery and creative. You have to really get creative. How the hell are we going to recreate this song? What they did in the studio. And go so far as to like put the John Bonham's natural delay when they recorded in some cathedral. We try to recreate that delay that they had. All kinds of in-depth, nerdy stuff. That's a lot of fun.
I like the analogy to a symphony orchestra that you wouldn't call a cover band.
Right.
Because
it's funny that goes past so many people because it's in the name.
Right, yeah. Right, yeah, it's a Black Jacket Symphony, yeah. But, you don't think of a symphony orchestra as a cover band, because what you think of them as doing is keeping a musical tradition alive.
Exactly.
So, we're not just mimicking this music, superficially. You're saying, hey, we can play the same notes. They're the holders of a tradition that is then being presented to the public. So it sounds like you guys do that with the popular music, with Pink Floyd and with the Beatles and things like that. And
just the greats of our generation.
Yeah, and sort of taking on that same role of, we are the keepers of this tradition, and it is our job to preserve and promote.
Exactly, and I think that's a really cool thing, but that you're pointing out, because that tradition is on the verge of being lost, and that tradition is the album, right?
Oh yeah.
People don't make albums anymore.
Yeah, right.
You know?
Yeah.
Dark Side of the Moon was a cohesive unit.
It was prime.
You know?
Complete in and of itself.
Abbey Road, right? I mean, come on.
Yeah,
Prime
right.
example of a cohesive, album. I don't hear one of those songs and then pause it at the end and not hear the next song in my head.
Yeah. Yeah.
When I hear the end of Heartbreaker by Led Zeppelin, I expect to hear Livin' Lovin' Maid, right? That's one song to me,
Right.
Yeah.
in my head anyway.
I mean, you don't just sit around and listen to that one song.
Yeah, right.
I mean, to take, just to use another Pink Floyd album, like Wish You Were Here or
Right.
something.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know what I'm saying? Oh, let's listen to that one song
Let's
from
listen to
Wish You Were
Shine
Here.
On You Crazy Diamond Part 5.
Part 5. Just
Leave it
to,
at that,
yeah. I'm in the mood for Welcome to the Machine. No, you listen to the whole. You listen to the whole thing, right? It's a piece of art in and of itself.
Right.
Yeah. That's something
So
that definitely has.
that's a
been
tradition
lost.
that's being lost, and I'm proud to be involved with something that's trying to keep it alive, and
Absolutely.
it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And like you said, it's all the lights and video and smoke and all that stuff. It's people like that too. It's a lot of fun.
It's fun.
It's big production.
So are these with the people that you're trying to keep alive in the Black Jacket Symphony? We were talking about Pink Floyd and Led Zeppelin. Are these your influences? Were these the people that inspired you to be a musician?
Man, absolutely.
Oh, nice.
It started with just what was popular, rock music that was popular when I was a kid. So and it was a great time to get into music, because that was the Nirvana grunge, Pearl Jam,
Right.
Seattle.
We
all that-
remember
all
well.
that good stuff. Yeah, and Jeremy knew me then, and my dear friend Will Cash. I don't know how much we want to get into the whole history and bore
We should
people
mention
about.
Will Cash because he's just a great fellow, man.
Yeah, and he's just one of my best friends, and very much responsible for my just being a musician and being a well-rounded and passionate one at that. But where was I going with that?
Influences, kind of.
Influences, yeah. So I first got into wanting to be a musician because of the stuff that was going on then. It's a really cool time in rock music. But then what inspired me to really dig in and really put in the work and be good was that all the classic greats. So
Yeah.
Led Zeppelin was huge for me. Huge. John
Yeah.
Paul Jones to this day. He's if you put a gun to my head, I'd probably say he's my favorite bass player.
Well, he's so much more than a bass player. He's
That's true. Yeah.
And he has he's an artist. He's not just thinking about just his bass part when he plays his bass part, right? He's thinking about the whole thing that's happening, and you can tell that in what he decides to play. And
Mainly locking in with
Bonham,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, and he knows how to make the right choices, in my opinion. He knows when to overplay. He knows when the space is there for him to take it up. He knows when to be musical. He knows when to be melodic. He knows when to be funky.
And
when
that's
to
so
just
much
be in the
of
pocket.
what it is to be a bass player, isn't it? Is to learn how to make good choices.
Yeah.
A lot of people tend to think of the bass as easier to play than the guitar. I've always felt like mechanically maybe that's true. But
not for me with my small hands.
Yeah, I got
I
big,
think
long,
it's
skinny
true.
fingers. So,
To an extent.
yeah, but artistically,
Right.
there's
Well,
a lot of
it's-
challenge in the bass.
I think, because obviously we've come across that over the years. I think it's easier to pick up the bass,
Yeah, it's easier
but it's
to.
just as big a challenge as anything else to be great at it
Yeah.
and to know what your role is and how to,
Yeah.
make musical decisions and
Easy
execute
to
them.
do, difficult to master.
Right.
Being a bassist as opposed to someone who happens to play the bass.
Right, yeah, being a bassist.
Or those guitar players that think they can pick up a bass.
Yeah,
and
I play guitar, so naturally I can play the
Yeah.
bass.
I have those 4 strings too.
Right. Exactly. You mean I only have to play one of them? Well, this should be easy.
Well, let's talk about this. Let's talk about your path as a bassist. Did you find the bass, or did the bass find you?
Oh man, I hate it because the bass found me.
Uh-huh.
And I really always thought the bass was really cool, but it really came down to when Will Cash and I were trying to start bands when we were kids, and we ended up at one point not having a bass player, and I think everyone knows how this goes.
Yeah,
When somebody has to draw the short straw.
Jeremy and I are both
and
nodding
pick up,
sagely.
and pick up the instrument that you and your group of friends are missing when you're kids, right?
Uh-huh.
Like that. I've heard that story so many times. But so I was the lesser guitar player. So, admittedly, Will was better than me. He'd been playing longer and so I was like, well, I like the bass anyway, and I really did look at it as an opportunity, honestly.
Mm-hmm. Paul McCartney had the same scenario.
Yeah, Paul
He
McCartney.
said, well, John and George were better guitarists than me.
Right.
And look what he did with the bass.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Tied for first, by the way.
Definitely. So have you dabbed in any styles like slap bass or popping, or experimented with the upright?
I've gotten into all that stuff at some point. I honestly thought I was going to be a slap guy.
Really?
I had a phase in late high school where I started actually getting pretty damn good at it, and I even went so far as to try to innovate my own techniques and approaches and do all this stuff with it, and then turns out it's not insanely practical.
Yeah.
It doesn't come up much, but I'm certainly glad that I have the skill.
Yeah, that's a skill I don't really have much as a bass player, actually.
I mean, at this point, I don't care to listen to Victor Wooten play for more than a few minutes.
Mm-hmm.
It just sounds slap bass to me kind of has this weird stigma almost. Secretly, I love it, and I think it's really cool. But I do also appreciate that it has its place.
Yeah.
And that's usually when people say, take a solo, and everyone stops, and you're like, now's the time where I can slap.
yeah.
But I haven't practiced enough
But I
slapping
haven't-
because I
right.
don't have the opportunity to play it often enough, so
Yeah.
crap.
It's yeah, and I actually do really enjoy tapping. I've got some fun stuff I like to do with that.
Oh,
It
yeah.
only ever comes out at sound check when I just want to annoy my band members.
Because when else do you do this tapping, honestly?
Yeah. I
It
mean,
doesn't happen very
I'm not
often.
going to do it at home.
You're not going to sit around, right?
Sit around tapping.
And for those of you who aren't specifically bassists, most of you know what these techniques are. Slapping being using your thumbs, percussive.
Right, yeah.
I almost like the kick of the kick drum, using your pulling up, popping
Yeah,
with your
when
finger.
when students want to learn slap, I tell them to imagine they're a drum set.
And the pop is the snare, and the thump is the kick, and whatnot. And the tapping technique is you're actually using force, kind of like a hammer-on, but you're attacking the string on the fret with your left hand, and you can be doing that with your right hand too. You're not actually plucking the string. You're picking
Right,
the string.
yeah. You're tapping a fret with your right hand, and also tapping a fret with your left hand to create, and tapping it with enough force will sound that note.
It's half of a hammer-on. I think that's pretty.
Right. So there's slapping and tapping. Anything else you'd particularly dig? There's not a whole lot of specific.
I mean, those are the ones, right? I mean, and then finger style and pick. I play with a pick relatively often.
Nothing wrong with that.
I mean, I mostly play with my fingers, and I prefer playing with my fingers, and I'm better with my fingers. But sometimes you want that tone. I mean, McCartney.
Yeah.
Come on, if it's
Yeah.
good enough for Paul.
I find myself using a pick way more than I did when I was younger.
Me too. Yeah.
And full of vinegar and whatnot.
Yes. There
Had
was
to prove
certainly
something.
there's a stigma to playing bass with a pick that I just don't agree with. I mean, even now I'm producing my buddy's record, and he's got this sort of kind of pop punk song on there, and I was at rehearsal and I looked at the bass player and said, "So, how do you feel about playing with a pick? He said, I don't feel very good about that at all. I said, all right. He said, how about I roll my tone and just play with a lot of attack? And I said, okay, well, whatever.
Well, now, if you haven't actually played much with a pick, it's not like you can just pick it up and do it.
Oh, no, absolutely. Yeah, I understood for sure.
And if you're skeptical, try it out. There's definitely a different tone it delivers. The pick has more of a growling, cutting, bright kind of tone, where the fingering style has more of a bassy kind of low end to it. But either way, there's a time and a place for the pick.
Yeah. I mean, I only do it when it's like, oh, this is the thing to do, And especially when I'm trying to recreate note for note, sound for sound stuff. Then when it's very, very obviously a pick being played, then I try to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I mean, there are some Metallica songs that just try playing those with your fingers. Just try.
Yeah,
like,
I mean,
some of that kind of stuff that gets so fast that
Well, and there's some stuff, like I said, that where there are fast passages that are easier with my fingers just because of how they lay out on the strings.
Right.
So if it's like multiple notes, I'm better at playing with my fingers. But if it's just like, drilling one note really fast, then I can probably get a little faster with a pick.
As far as your style is concerned, do you have a particular genre or style that you prefer or stick to? If someone says, what is your bass playing like?
Yeah.
Obviously, it's a combination of all the things you've learned, right?
Yeah. It's really hard to say what to put a genre to it for sure. It attempts to be well-rounded.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's always been a goal of mine is to really at least strive for an understanding of multiple styles and genres, right? And my biggest influences being like Paul McCartney, John Paul Jones, Barry Oakley, and then this other subset of just like, all the great guys who did Southern rock, or like Southern blues rock,
Uh-huh.
So I mean, I don't know what to call that, pop rock, classic rock. I don't know.
I call it a bassist's bassist.
Roger Waters, yeah,
bassist. There you go.
But I can't self-proclaim that.
Got you covered, man. Got you covered.
So, John Paul Jones, Paul McCartney, Roger Waters. I'm going to go ahead and say Jaco.
Jaco Pastorius.
Yes, Jaco Pastorius. He's not so much an influence on my style. Well, he is. But I don't claim to have that strength.
Yeah.
I guess it's hard to say, like...
Sometimes with people like him, it's not so much that he's an influence, it's more like, man, I wish I could play like that.
Right, yeah.
Or what he brought to the genre.
Yeah.
He was one of the more kind of flashy jazz bassists, I guess.
But I would
Before
but I
people
would
were doing
argue still a very musical player. And honestly, Flea,
Flea, yeah.
I think he's actually underrated in a sense.
I kind of agree, actually.
I've even talked to bass players that say he's overrated, which tells me he's underrated because I feel like they're missing out on a lot of what he's actually doing. Like when he's not slapping and popping, he comes up with really, really wonderful bass lines. Some of my favorite bass work. I like to cite Soul to Squeeze.
I was just thinking about that in my head, actually.
Amazing bass line.
Yeah.
Throughout, and then he like,
I could have lied.
for the last double chorus, he's developing these themes and variations, and it's just so well crafted. It's incredible. So if you're a bass player and you're up and coming, and you want to know something about how really good bass is crafted in a song, definitely check out Soul to Squeeze by the Chili Peppers. Mike League from Snarky Puppy.
Tell me about Mike League.
His compositions are great. His playing is great. And it's really impressive to me the way he goes about things, because he could easily compose his music to showcase flashy bass playing, but he doesn't. Everything he plays is musical and it's appropriate and it's in the pocket and it's perfectly there to serve the song or the composition. And I think that's so important. You know, we could talk about that all day. It's you know, like we said earlier about making good decisions. What you do should always serve the song.
The big picture.
And Mike League is just like a shining example of that. I mean, I think even Jaco Pastorius didn't always do that. He kind of crafted to show off quite a bit, which that's cool too, you know. And so a couple of and there are always going to be unsung heroes as well.
Yeah.
Right? So and we all run into these gems that we really get into. So Robert DeLeo from Stone Temple Pilots.
Ah, yeah.
Right? He's just so good at crafting a bass part that serves the song, and is musical and in the pocket and really, really good.
There's nothing more I'd love than to be able to play Stone Temple Pilots in the background while we're talking about this. Because of copyright issues, do you have one or two songs you might like to recommend to our listeners?
Sure. I mean, all the hits, man, like Plush, you know, right off the bat. Some great bass playing in there. He does some cool, like, inversions and voice leading stuff that you wouldn't think would work on a bass that in a way that doesn't seem self-indulgent.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it really does just serve the song, and it works so splendidly. So Plush is a great one for voice leading. Interstate Love Song. He and the drummer, man, I mean, it's just a lesson in locking in. So that, man, really, really cool.
God, real quick, we didn't talk about locking in a lot, but real quick, I do want to say, listen for that kick, bass players.
Right? Yeah. Not always.
Not always.
Don't make that the
golden rule.
The golden rule, but make it your starting point.
Make it a consideration, at
Yeah.
least.
A strong consideration.
Anyway, who else?
You know who I love is Ross Valerie.
Ross Valerie.
The guy from Journey.
Oh.
Of all things, yeah. I'm actually a pretty big Journey fan now. Always kind of considered them more of a guilty pleasure, but now I'm...
They're making a comeback, man.
Well, yeah, there's that, but I sing their praises now, man. Like, they've got some stuff that has just blown me away now that I've been forced to dig into their catalog. Stone in Love sticks out in my mind as a great piece of bass work. Another track off Escape, what's it? Dead or Alive. It's got some cool, and I'm just a sucker for guitar bass unison riff stuff.
Okay.
And I've always been into that. Rage Against the Machine, you know, etc.
Good way for us bass players to learn melody.
Yeah. And to get in on the guitar player's action. And I don't know, something about playing in unison with a guitar player just seems fun and cool to me. I don't know. So yeah, he's done a lot of great stuff. I mean, people, you always hear about Neil Schon and Steve Smith and of course Steve Perry.
Of course.
But yeah, Ross Valerie right there with him.
Nice. Yeah. Any other unsung heroes you can think of?
I'm sure there are plenty, but those are big ones.
I know a sung hero that we haven't mentioned yet.
I do know a sung hero we haven't mentioned yet.
Who would that be?
You must be talking about Les Claypool.
I am talking about Les Claypool.
Good. Well, that's funny. I don't think of Les Claypool as a bass player. I think of him as a wizard.
Yeah.
You know, he's just this guy who's done these things with the bass that to this day nobody knows how he's doing it. You know, I've looked it up, I've researched it, nobody agrees, and I've never heard one person actually replicate Tommy the Cat.
Yeah.
You know.
God.
And it's funny because, you know, I kind of diminished the value of slap bass earlier, but Claypool, he's on a different planet, right? He's just over here doing a different thing. He's not a human bass player. He's this alien wizard guy who's innovating in ways, and he's a character.
Mm-hmm.
He's a persona.
Mm-hmm.
He's a presence. He's a fascinating force.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We were talking about favorites earlier, and you mentioned, Victor Wooten, the fact that you can kind of listen to him and be really blown away, at first. And it's quite amazing, the stuff he does. But then after a few songs of that, or after a few minutes of that, it kind of loses. You kind of get lost in all the craziness that's going on. I mean, technically, I'd say Victor Wooten is one of the most amazing bass players.
Absolutely, he is.
And not taking anything away from that, but it's true. Like, there's only so much of that you can really...
Right.
But Claypool, kind of stylistically, has always been my favorite because he manages to find a way to make that still interesting.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is that it's interesting. And part of that is that it's not just his technique. He puts a character to it, right? And I don't mean character like he's a character. I mean, there is character to his playing.
Like a signature sound.
Yeah. I mean, and of course his singing and songwriting and compositional skills. I mean, it's all there, and it's all very, very, very cool to me.
Mm-hmm. And I can't recommend any one Primus song, but if you listen to any Primus song, you'll get an idea of Les Claypool's character.
Right. Yeah.
And it won't sound like
got a
anything
voice.
else that is out there.
Exactly.
Or that has been out there.
Mm-hmm. Or will ever be out there.
Probably not, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on, shall we?
So were you self-taught as a bassist? Did you have instructors?
I mean, I took guitar lessons when I was a kid, and then in college, because I went to music school. You can't do that.
You may have had the same bass instructor we did.
I don't know. My teacher in college was Abe Becker.
Abe Becker.
Oh,
yeah.
we know Abe.
Abe went to John Carroll, the same high school that I went to.
Oh,
He was a couple
really? I
years
didn't know you
behind
guys
me.
went to high school together.
And he was a badass way back then.
Still is. He's actually done some work with Black Jacket Symphony when I can't be there as well.
Me and Matt had this guy named Cleve Eaton. He was this older jazz cat. He had played with Count Basie.
Oh yeah,
Some of the greats.
Yeah, and being Cleve's student was a unique experience that we can all
never forget, man. I loved my experience with Cleve. Fantastic teacher, fantastic personality, and a great musician. Now, knowing Abe and knowing Cleve, I'm going to go out on a limb and say Aaron wasn't yelled at nearly as much as you and I were yelled at.
Probably not.
Probably not. Half of my lesson time was waxing philosophical about the circle of fifths versus the circle of seconds for something else. Just all kinds of fun, far out stuff that Abe would get into.
Abe might like this podcast.
Abe might like this podcast.
I think he'd like it very much.
Yeah, we should do a shout out to Abe and say, listen to the podcast.
We mentioned you, by the way.
We mentioned you, so now you've got to listen to it.
Right.
That's great, man.
How many bass players can we fit in this room?
We didn't really talk about like your likes and dislikes. Some of the things that you liked from your instructors.
Yeah, tell us what you liked about Abe as an instructor.
No, I really enjoyed that. He just sort of had this approach of let's sit down and engage in real conversation about these things. Like let's be nerds together. And it was always just very very thought provoking. And then he would push me really hard too as well. So half the time was spent just sort of laid back, like letting me kind of sponge it up. And then the other half the time it was, being able to improvise rhythm changes in all 12 keys. Or, just something nuts like that, So every other week I would have to learn a new jazz standard in all 12 keys or something crazy like that.
Oh, man. Yeah. We only had to learn them in whatever key they were in the real book, right?
Yeah.
Because then we had.
I mean,
had to learn
I'm
several of them between
exaggerating. It
lessons.
was, I'm exaggerating it. That only happened a few times, but when it happened, it was work.
It was
pushed me,
it was an experience, yeah.
And I think that's great. I mean, because if you're gonna do that, then you have to access a different part of your brain that I think is very important, and that's theoretical analysis of what's going on.
Sure.
So
yeah.
you're not thinking A, C, G, D. You're thinking,
Yeah.
6, 1, 5, 2, or whatever.
Right.
And
And it's thinking like that enables you to play what you're playing in any key.
Exactly.
Because that becomes,
yeah,
applicable to any key.
yeah. And I think that's so extremely important and should be obvious, because I mean, how much easier is that once you can think that way? How much easier than that is that than thinking, okay, now this note a minor third down, now this note a minor third down, now this, so
Takes a lot of RAM.
yeah.
RAM.
My girlfriend and I were having this conversation just the other day, actually, about how you don't really have to get too far into music analysis before you sort of abstract away from the idea of key,
Right.
because you start talking about things that are applicable to all keys. We were talking about that with the circle of fifths in the last, I don't know which one's going up when.
It's already been up now because it's coming out today.
Awesome. So we were talking about that in the last
Episode 25.
Yeah, the one on the circle of fifths. This is things that are applicable to any key. That you reach a point where whatever you're talking about, a key is just where you start on that process, and so
Right.
it's a system that can get delayed to anything, and it's kind of funny to think about it, but you don't really have to get too deep before you reach that point.
Right.
You don't have to get
It's where the key almost becomes arbitrary. for lack of
almost
a better word.
arbitrary, almost just where you started.
Right.
Yeah, and that's not something that happens, in grad school.
Yeah.
That's something that happens, fairly quickly. Is that you
Yeah,
get
I mean, if you pass your
beyond the
first
key
theory
thing.
class, you should be about there.
if you pass mine.
yeah, right. Yeah.
Cool, man. Well, as far as instructing and teaching, do you teach?
I do. Yeah.
Tell us about some of your teaching methods and what do you think is most important for your students.
Man, I'll tell you, every student's different.
Yeah.
So I try to approach every student like a human being and not just an instructional book or video that you can look up on the internet.
It must be tailored towards the individual.
Yeah, and it all depends on what they want to do. I have a lot of respect for someone who has a strict curriculum, and that's what they stick to. And if you're going to take with them, that's what you do. Right. And sometimes I even envy that, because I could, with some amount of effort, I could just do that, and then that's what I do. And then if you want to take with me, that's what we're going to do. But I like the idea that I can mold a teenager into what I think a good bass player should be. Or a 50-year-old woman wants to come and learn a few songs that she can play with her husband who plays guitar around the house.
Mm-hmm.
And that's cool too.
Yeah.
So it really depends on the student and what they're trying to do, right?
So this woman might not be as interested in the circle of fifths or all the
Right.
theory stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
You might have been interested.
She doesn't want to learn notation. It's
So you got to change a little bit of your.
yeah. I mean, I
your
just
approach.
have to kind of rein it in,
Mhm.
and just kind of take a more laid back approach, but still, still put in the effort, because you want them to see results. You want them to get something for their money, and so you have to push them a little bit and make them understand, like, yes, you are going to have to put some time in, and all that stuff.
Yeah, but on the other hand, making that person practice all 12 major scales in 3 octaves for 4
Yes.
hours a day is probably just going to lose you as a student.
Exactly.
I've lost 1 or 2 from that myself before I learned. Not everyone's a theory nerd.
Yeah.
Yeah, our bass instructor would have lost me had I not been in college and needing the.
Oh, I thought he was just so funny. He was funny.
he was hilarious. He was one of the best bass players ever. But we digress.
Well, as we do.
But I love teaching. It's it's rewarding. It's satisfying. It's incredible to contribute to someone's growth as a musician in a very, very direct way.
Absolutely is. And as an instructor myself, I completely agree and empathize with that.
Yeah.
And this is a great time to ask you, what is it that you really want your students to accomplish? You know, and every student is different. But let's say somebody who really doesn't know anything beyond the fact that he or she would like to be a bass player, and they come to you and say, "Well, teach me how to play bass." How do you feel like you get them to that point where they feel like they've done what they want to do with it?
Really, I think just to achieve certain goals that I know I wanted to achieve, right? And things that I have the luxury of hindsight to know which of those things were really helpful in my career and my growth as a musician. So I just want them to achieve some of those things. A solid grasp on music theory, right? I think, for a serious student who wants to be serious about their instrument.
Yeah, big fan of that.
You're going to have to learn your theory if you're going to work with me on this.
Yeah.
Because that's how we communicate, right? I mean, it's all about being able to communicate and to express what we're trying to say and describe what we're trying to do, and like we talked about, learning songs or being able to play a song in a different key, and just all these things. We could talk for however many podcasts you guys have done now.
Yeah, right. And will do.
Yeah, about the importance of understanding these aspects of music and theory and
these sort of core concepts. Yeah, it is a form of communication. This is how you talk about what you want to do. This is how you articulate your musical ideas,
right?
To other people.
Yeah, and it bums me out when people resist that. And they look at it as if you're thinking in some kind of box,
right?
Or it takes the magic out of it or something, and that's.
Takes the magic out of it.
We talked about that.
We talked about that. Yeah.
Yeah. I can't get behind that. I mean, I just really can't. It's like if a chef were to tell you, "Oh, don't tell me that's called an onion."
I don't care.
That takes the magic out of it.
I don't need to know whether it's an onion or a shallot or or poisonous mushrooms.
Look, I know what it tastes like. I can just put it. It's
my favorite analogy was always
like me knowing that I'm on the 5 chord doesn't take the magic out of that chord.
No. Matter of fact, it adds a huge amount of magic in my personal opinion, because when you understand what it means to be on a 5 chord, then you understand. Then that 5 chord goes somewhere.
Right. You know that it wants to go to the 1, or it wants to deceive you and go to the 6,
or
the flat 6 even, and all this stuff.
Why? Why do you feel deceived when it goes to the 6?
Yeah,
why is that?
I think
it's fascinating.
To quote you, Matt, I think your goal as a teacher is to replace the magic with understanding, right?
Yes.
A level of understanding.
I replace magic with understanding.
See, and I always wanted understanding. That was the thing for me.
Well, me too. Yeah, I think that's why I do that.
And maybe that's why the magic was never lost, really, because understanding was just as satisfying as anything else. Because I love music, I always wanted to know how it works, how it ticks.
Right.
Why does this thing make me feel this way? I want to be able to see that.
Absolutely.
And know it and embrace it and apply it myself. And,
And then maybe when you sit down to write songs or go on a stage to play songs, you can use that knowledge and make those people feel the way that you know. Yeah.
They'll think it's magic.
They'll think it's magic, right? Yeah.
And also people have this misconception that all quote music theory is just a mechanical understanding or a
set of rules.
Yeah, or a set of rules, or it's just it's just a vernacular, and that's all it is.
Yeah.
But what it really is to me is an understanding of music, right?
Yeah.
Even if you can't put it into words, like I talked about how it's it's communication, but great composers of our time who famously didn't know theory, like Paul McCartney, for instance.
Right, yeah.
Paul McCartney knows his stuff.
Even
if he can't tell you that he's playing a deceptive cadence, he knows what a B major chord in the key of G or whatever on the piano, whatever it is, he has an understanding of what he's doing, even if he's not putting it into words. I mean, you can't listen to the bass line for something, the song Something.
Right, yeah.
And say that guy doesn't know his theory. I mean, that's just...
Please,
I don't buy it.
Any of those Abbey Road bass lines.
I mean, that's just off the top of my head, you know.
Yeah, well, theory is meant to be a descriptor, actually. What we're actually doing is going to, the great musicians and composers like Beethoven or Arvo Pärt or Paul McCartney and trying to describe what they did and understand what they did.
Exactly, and that's my first day of theory class in music school. I had a wonderful teacher. I hope she was there when you guys were, Dale Reynolds.
Yes.
Yeah. But, oh, man, my favorite teacher I've ever had ever. And that was the first thing she said, is that we're not here to talk about rules. We're here to understand what the greats have done.
Yes.
Nice.
Yeah. I have to get this analogy in. We can cut it if it's a non sequitur. But my favorite analogy was always, if you were having gallbladder surgery, do you want the surgeon that says, you know what, I don't really get into surgical theory, that's just a set of rules that I don't want to conform to,
I'm a rule breaker.
I'm a rebel. I do surgery by hand and by feel, and that's the way.
By feel.
Yeah.
You don't want that.
Do you want that gallbladder surgeon, or do you want the gallbladder surgeon that knows, I know exactly how to do gallbladder surgery
right.
from step one to the last one?
Well, on the subject of theory, actually, I got my next question for you is because a lot of our listeners aren't complete music nerds, such as us. Some of them are
Some only half
if
music
they made
nerds?
it this far, hopefully they're still with us.
This far.
But some of these people aren't reading music, but they want to know a little bit more about it. What are your thoughts on how important is it for someone to be able to read music?
It can be not important at all.
Because string players, guitarists and bassists, mandolins, banjos, whatever, they all have tablature. It's kind of a number system, right?
Right. Well, I have a lot to say about tablature.
Yeah. This is your time.
Talk to us, man.
This is your time.
This is a safe space.
So reading music, obviously, in any form, can be very, very useful and important, and sometimes even crucial. I mean, if you're a symphony player, you are reading music. That's the only way you can do that.
You're not going to be a symphony player if you're not. You're effectively illiterate. And
I mean, you can't do that. But if you're playing in rock bands and you've got a very, very good understanding of your instrument and have your own way to figure out what you're supposed to do, and nobody's saying you have to read this piece of music and that's what you have to do this gig. If you don't need it, you don't need it, right? Mm-hmm. But it's been very important and very useful for me as someone who wanted to be well-rounded and to be able to take as many gigs as I could. Mm-hmm. So I can step into a theater gig as a sub and, at least not fall completely flat on my face, right? I mean, I'm not a great reader, but I'm okay at it,
Enough to take it home.
Certainly well enough to take it home. I mean, I
I
can decipher anything that's on a page pretty much. Right. I mean, aside from like whatever, Zappa's famously wacky stuff and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, within reason, I can decipher anything. Just give me a minute. Sight reading, I don't know. I can probably.
For me, it would depend on what it is.
Yeah, I mean, obviously,
But I mean, if it's a whole bunch of eighth notes, I'm going to sight read it just fine.
Yeah.
But you start getting to a point where my sight reading starts.
Ties in the next measure.
I mean, enough like 16th note rests and stuff that like when I hear it, I'm like, oh, that's And,
it makes perfect sense when you hear it.
But enough of that, and it starts getting a little hairy for me. But I think it's very important if you want to be a well-rounded professional musician.
To be able to read notation.
Yes, notation
specifically,
and not tablature.
Mm-hmm. Haven't maybe I can't read tablature as good as I can notation.
Same here. For example.
Yeah, me too. Isn't that funny?
It is funny.
I think it's
There's a very good reason for that.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah.
Tell us.
So when you're reading notation, that's actually a lot less information for your brain to take in than tablature.
Ah,
Right?
yeah, okay.
Okay, and think about it this way. It's telling you what to play, not how to play it. You're a good bass player, so you already know how to play it. You know that an E is on the 7th fret of your A string.
Right.
You don't need to be told that, right? So that's less information on the page for you to work out.
Process it in its
Right.
flat
And,
instant.
and think about this. What is notation? It's an XY axis, right? You've got time going one way, and you've got pitch going the other.
Yeah.
So you can visually work out what's going on a lot more easily. You can see that the pitch is going up by step.
The contours.
You can see the contours, and
Yeah.
you can follow it in time from left to right.
And if you've been keeping up with your ear training, you are particularly good at this because this is what we're trying to teach you how to do.
And so, and you do it, and you start to recognize shapes, right? So, and it's called, I think it's called bunching. It's like, so when you read words on a page, you're not reading every letter, right?
Yeah,
you're
you read the first and the
shapes.
last, and then you see. Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
Filling
you're
in.
looking at a shape that is the word, and that's all, and that's it. So if you look at like a major scale on a staff, you kind of recognize that immediately, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
and
and you recognize thirds, you recognize fourths and fifths. You know, line to line to line, space to space to space. Those are thirds, right?
you can sort of recognize a riff, if you're looking
Yeah.
at it in notation, you sort of see a.
And so it's
a
like the
pattern
difference between reading our end result written language of English versus reading phonetically written words. How much harder is it for you to read phonetically written words than it is
Yeah, I can't
words?
do it.
Yeah, I can't either.
Not a full sentence. Yeah. I couldn't read a full
So
sentence.
that's the difference between sheet music and tablature.
That's fascinating. I've
So
never really thought about
writing
it that
something
way.
phonetically tells you how to say it,
Yeah.
but you don't need that because you've learned these words and how to say them.
Right. Yeah.
So you can just see the words.
you
and
just need
execute them.
you just need the word.
Yeah.
That's a fascinating way to look at it. I've always sort of felt like tablature did not give you as much information. Because
And that can be
because of
true
the-
too. It's
the-
harder to write rhythms in tablature and stuff like that.
Dynamics.
Yeah,
Dynamics
rhythms,
and-
dynamics, things like that. But I've never thought about it as sort of like you say, sort of focusing on information I don't really need because I know what E is and I know
Yeah.
what A is. But yeah, that's a fascinating way to look at it.
I don't want to knock tablature as an educational tool. I think it can be very useful for people that don't know where all the E's on their bass are, right? Or whatever.
Right.
So I definitely incorporate it in teaching,
But the ultimate goal is to learn where the E's are.
Yeah, of course.
So what is your practice schedule like? How often do you practice? How much?
It's never enough.
Good, yeah, great answer.
Never. It hasn't been enough for a very long time.
I think almost every musician I talk to says the same thing, whether they practice 30 minutes a week or 10 hours a day. They always say, I don't practice enough.
Right. And in my case, it's in so many cases, it's true. You and O'Teal once told me that's a good problem to have, because instead of practicing for practice sake, you're learning songs for gigs that are making you money.
Yeah. Well, you're actually playing. You're applying.
Right.
Yeah.
So
your knowledge.
I spend lots of time learning songs and various other things that are musically productive. But as far as sitting down and just picking up my bass and practicing,
You don't have a set regimen of exercises, scales, arpeggios. Yeah.
I mean,
I can't say I do either at this point,
I tried to pick one up at one point and just like, nah, forget that. I
yeah,
didn't.
and I certainly try to find my time. And when I do try to pick up my bass and practice, I've got many go-to exercises and things like that that I love and that I think are very helpful, and they're ones I teach my students and things like that. I encourage anyone to try to find time to practice. and certainly don't look to me as an example
Yeah.
of good practice.
Right.
You know,
Don't do as I do.
yeah, do as I say.
Like when I'm practicing, it's kind of like you were saying. I play in enough bands and play enough shows to where practicing with the band is practice. You know, a couple of times a week.
Mm-hmm.
But whenever I'm recording something, like if I'm going to try and record a solo guitar or bass or whatever, I do from time to time try and do something that I have not been able to do prior to that. Pull
Sure.
something off that I was not able to do. So
Yeah.
I kind of inch my way forward as I pressure myself in the recording studio. That's one way that I kind of improve my skills. What are some ways that you kind of...
That's a great point. What I'll try to do is I'll try to remember a moment when I'm on a gig where I played with less confidence than I would like to have.
Hey.
There you go.
I'll say, well, there was this groove, there was this tempo, there was this key, whatever, and I try to compartmentalize those things and remember them later and say, okay, how could I have done this better with more confidence, with more deliberation? And so that's sort of my ultimate goal is to play deliberately. I think that's extremely important.
Yeah.
So often what I'll do is exactly that. I'll try to remember where I was struggling and say, okay, let's try to not let that happen again. I want to be able to nail that, you know, and often it's something where it's not like a part that I had trouble playing. It's like a part where I had a chance to kind of improvise a little bit and play cool bass stuff, you know, cool like funky staccato 16th notes, but for whatever reason it was just in a weird tempo for me or a weird key that didn't quite lay out with the open strings I like you know. So it's usually those types of things because...
Any good tips for making those things work a little bit better? Stretching your hand out, keeping your fingers in shape.
I can't really speak very much to that. I mean, I just do the things everybody else does. I stretch my fingers a little. Just
Right. Yeah.
you know, don't let yourself cramp up if you can help it. You know, if it hurts, you're doing something wrong. Like don't.
Yeah. Right.
This is not. Playing is not a no pain, no gain thing. Like, don't hurt yourself.
Quite the opposite, actually.
Yeah, yeah.
People will tease me all the time when they see me at gigs. I'm, cracking my knuckles, which is bad. You're not supposed to do that.
Yeah.
I can't help it. Shaking the stiffness out of my hands, a lot. And
Squeezing your finger to
squeezing the.
My Cleve Eaton, my bass instructor, kind of said the first day I walked in there, he said, "Let me see those hands, Holmes." Put my hands up. He said, "Mm-hmm," and he said, "You get yourself some matchbooks, wrap some paper towels around them so it doesn't hurt, and then put a matchbook in between each finger." So I'm sitting there with my hands spread wide open, matchbook spreading my fingers apart. I guess just to stretch my fingers.
It was supposed to get you used to having your hand in that.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that was one physical thing that I had to do to get
I've never
to
done
that
anything
point.
like that. Sometimes I'll, if I don't really get a chance to warm up, a trick Kevin Scott taught me is you can run your hands under warm water, and that'll kind of get your muscles in a good place to. Literally warms your hands up.
Get the blood flowing. Yeah. That makes sense. I want to quote Flea again.
Good.
Actually, because you were talking about how it felt to be not entirely confident. When you're playing, you go back and you review these times. I know exactly what you're talking about. And Flea had this great quote. I can't remember if it was his or if he was quoting somebody else, but he said, "You play every note like it's your last note." And if I'm not confident, there's some notes that I'm not going to play like it's my last note. Right?
Yeah.
I want to be able to play every note like it's my last note.
Oh man, wouldn't that be great?
Yeah.
How to get there. All right.
Now I'm thinking of the last note I played, and
was that your last?
And I'm asking myself.
It's like what they ask you in church. If you died in a car wreck
today, would you be proud of that bass track you laid down?
Let's just try not to die.
Yeah, until my next recording session or something.
Or like the next thing I play that I think is great, I'm just gonna call it quits.
Next time
That's it.
Next time I'm even 80% happy. It's like, all right,
I can die now.
Time to go back to school.
So, are there any other exercises you might recommend? Some things you teach your students?
So I do this thing where I randomly the long and short of it is I randomly pick a mode or scale,
Okay.
and I randomly pick notes within that scale. You'll typically have, 7 notes in a scale, so I'll randomly pick like usually 2 of those notes in the scale, and then I'll randomly raise or lower each of those notes, right? So I'll literally roll the dice.
Okay, this is how you randomly select.
Yeah, and it could be I could just pick them randomly too, which is sometimes I'll just do that with my students because I don't carry dice around with me.
Oh, you can pick their random numbers, but they can't pick their own random numbers.
Right,
because they're
right,
going to
yeah.
put their own bias.
Yeah,
E minor,
exactly.
great scale to work with, right?
Sure. And so typically I'll start in open position because a lot of students have, and even I to this day, may have a little more trouble with open position scales. I don't know why that is. I guess it's something about the open not being a fret anymore.
Right, it's a pattern.
You're not putting it all in one place under your fingers.
Shapes don't mean as much.
Yeah, it's not as shape oriented if it's an open position. And a lot of the times you may end up with no open notes anyway, because there's no E, A, D, and G naturals, whatever. And so you start with the lowest note you have available with what you end up with. So you may end up with Lydian with a lowered second and a raised sixth, something like that. And you figure out what the notes are in that scale, and you play it, starting in open position and really get comfortable there. And then, of course, you apply it to the whole fretboard if you want, because that's what you do, right? When you learn your scales and modes and whatever, you try to be able to do it up and down the neck. And so that's been a lot of fun. That's actually kind of a recent revelation of mine, and it really took having a student really stick it out and get really good, and me having to stretch myself to figure out how to push him.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, but you know what they say, you just have to stay one lesson ahead of your student, right?
Right. Ideally.
Yeah.
At the least. That's pretty cool. So what you're doing is you're kind of familiarizing them with just the fingerboard, for one thing, and for the flavor of the different modes
Right.
involved.
Yeah. Well, you start, they've got to understand their modes first.
Okay.
And then the flavors of those modes. And then what this really is more of an exercise, honestly. Because you'll end up with weird stuff like the 6th and the 7th end up being the same note. Or something like that. It's so you get into this weird convoluted stuff, but it's more of a mental exercise than anything, I think. But it's a puzzle to be solved, and it's just a good way to really push yourself. Yeah.
And your students, I guess.
Oh, well, of course, yeah.
Okay, everybody, it is time to talk about the instrument itself. I'm going to start off with the upright,
Okay.
because I think it came out a little bit before the electric bass.
A little
Just
bit.
a little bit.
If my research...
Yeah, a
is
couple
correct.
of centuries. Yeah.
So while scholars dispute the more accurate origins, the original bass, a.k.a. upright, the contrabass, the string bass, the
AKA the
stand-up
bass viol.
bass viol, bass fiddle. I haven't heard that as much, but I don't think Mozart called it a bass fiddle.
No, I don't think
Acoustic
he did it.
bass. Yeah.
It began its rise as a member of a violin family, like you were saying.
Right.
The earliest known illustration of a double bass goes back to 1516, but its first mention predates that by over 20 years. So somewhere in the late 1400s might have been where it kind of reared its head. Research suggests that there have been close to 50 different tunings for this instrument before we all settled on the E, A, D, G, from the lowest to the highest.
Right.
I wonder why it went against the grain on
Tuning
tuning
in
in
fourths
fourths
instead
as
of
opposed
fifths
to
like the
fifths,
violin.
yeah.
Because it was
and the cello. And,
my understanding, and anybody out there who knows more than me, definitely let me know if I'm wrong here. But my understanding was that it was because it was part of the viol, which was the forerunner to the violin.
Okay.
And so the viol was just, like soprano viol, alto viol, bass viol, and then contrabass viol, which became the contrabass, and they were tuned in fourths, whereas the smaller violino, and then actually there was the viola, and then the even smaller violino, which became the violin, sort of, was a different thing who were tuned in fifths. But that's just sort of my general. I absorbed that somewhere.
Yeah. Right,
yeah. If I'm wrong, somebody tell me.
Email us.
Yeah, email us.
No one ever emails us. Just email us about something. Tell us we're wrong.
Well, are we checking the email? People could be emailing us all the.
I do.
Okay.
I do. So anyways, this tuning in fourths, like we were talking about, was finally kind of established in the early 1900s. That's when it became.
Wow,
a
that's
thing.
late. Early 1900s.
Took them long enough. Yeah.
It was a standard, but it was finally standardized, so to speak.
Okay.
Well, like some of the earlier models back in the 17th century were said to have had up to six strings.
Really? Huh.
Even before we thought the 6-string bass was kind of a new cool thing when we saw it, but apparently that's been around.
Yeah.
Before that. Some of the earlier models had three strings. Some of them had anywhere between 3 and 5 strings.
Oh wow. Just like basses today.
Yeah. It's up to your creativity. Was it the presidency of the United States of America?
Had
Two.
just
I
two?
think. Yeah, I think he
Was
had
it two? I
think it
can't
was just
remember
two.
if they had like 2 on their guitar and 1 on their bass, or they may have had 2.
No, I think the guitar player had all 6.
Had all 6, but then the bass player only had
like
2.
I think. Yeah.
Well, you know.
It's what you do with it, right? But anyway, some of these older models, they featured gut string frets, which is kind of interesting. So the first basses actually had frets. They would wrap gut strings around where the frets would be.
Oh wow.
Oh wow.
So I thought that was kind of interesting. What is the gut string? Just what it sounds like. You know, they come from many animals. People like to say cat gut, but it was never officially determined that the cat intestine was the official string of the.
So we weren't very picky about what kind of gut we're.
More often sheep.
All right, yeah. Of course, now if you get gut strings, they're synthetic.
Hopefully so.
Oh,
I hope no creatures had to die.
Almost assuredly, yeah. They're aesthetic. They're synthetic now. You can still get gut strings for.
Right.
But they're synthetic.
As far as the wood goes, on the higher end instruments, the ebony wood is used for the fingerboard. That black ebony wood. The lower end instruments, they would just paint wood black to give it that. To ebonize it, so to speak. And speaking of ebonizing, I know I said they painted black earlier, but ebonizing is actually a very complicated, time-consuming chemical process. Anyways, regarding the wood, typically most of the body is made out of maple, and the top, or I guess the front, if you're facing the instrument head-on, is made of spruce, which is actually a bit more of a flexible wood, better for transmitting those frequencies more vigorously, I guess you would say. So spruce and cedar would typically be used a lot, but spruce compared to cedar, I think, has a brighter sound and tends to mature quicker over time and more drastically. On the lower price models, other woods were used, such as laminated plywood, even, but those are actually a little bit more resilient. They're a little bit easier in weather changes.
Yeah.
That's kind of interesting. Everything on the bass is glued together except for the sound post and the bridge and the tailpiece. In the upright bass, those are all the parts you had to adjust.
Right, yeah.
Now, as far as the sound post is concerned, I'm pretty sure tension holds it in.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so if something happens and the sound post falls, you can get a luthier to take care of that pretty easily.
It's happened to me in travel before.
Really?
Yeah. I was in a situation where I had to actually check my upright bass.
Oh.
And which I knew was just
Bad.
asking for. So sure enough, yeah, got home and had to get the kind people at Homewood Music to put my bridge back.
When you got home after the show.
Yeah.
What would you have done otherwise? Would you have been able to do that yourself?
No.
Yeah, wow.
No, I am not a luthier. No.
Man, that's pretty horrifying. The only other thing is that compared to other instruments in the violin family who have peg boxes for tuning, where the tuning knobs are, the bass actually uses gear and head tuning knobs. Whereas the other instruments of that family tend to use literally pegs for their peg boxes as tuning knobs, which rely on tension.
Yeah.
Tension and friction kind of hold this thing in.
I wonder why the bass changed.
I think it's just a matter of the amount of tension, maybe.
Yeah, so that's just too much. It's
Yeah, it
just
may have
not-
just been necessity.
Yeah.
Enough times people, damn thing popped out again. I know even my cello, which is half the size of those instruments, it can take a lot of upper arm strength just to get those pegs to sit in there proper. So we all know, we know a little bit more about the electric bass than we do the upright. But to be fair, I feel like we should say a little bit about the electric bass.
Of course.
Let's see here. You know, it looks like a guitar, but it sounds like a daddy. We've all seen it before.
The dad guitar.
The dad guitar? Where was that from?
That was from Flight of the Conchords.
Flight of the Conchords, yeah.
Oh, wait,
Murray, Reese Darby, yeah, the actor who played
Oh
Murray.
my God, yeah, they're so
Yeah,
great.
it's like the dad guitar and the mom guitar. Yeah.
Murray would say that. Oh wow.
So the electric bass was actually invented in the early 1930s by musician and inventor Paul Tutmark, who developed the first systems to he also developed the first systems to amplify a double bass. So he was kind of deep in this. No pun intended. Deep, yeah. Unlike the contrabass, this was fretted and intended to be played horizontally. His company was Audiovox, now known as Vox, with two X's. So that was the first electric bass. The instrument he created was the Audiovox Model 736 bass fiddle, is what he called it, electric bass fiddle. Now,
I love that name.
I love the bass fiddle too. Sounds like dad guitar a little bit. In 1951, Lear Fender, along with George Fullerton, developed the more widely known Fender Precision bass, which we see everywhere.
That's famous.
So by 1953, Mark Montgomery of Lionel Hampton's big band became the first to tour with this precision bass. And in the same year, Gibson came out with this interesting kind of violin-shaped short-scale bass that had this end pin that could expand or retract, and you could play it horizontally, or you could take the pen, pull it out all the way, and orient it vertically for upright style playing. So if you can imagine almost like the Beatle bass, the Paul McCartney kind of...
The Hofner, yeah.
Yeah. You can actually stand this thing upright, and this pin drops out of the bottom of it, and you can play it like an upright. So it's kind of like a transformer bass, you know? But yeah, by 1956, Dan Electro joined in the scene, along with Hofner, which is where that famous Beatle bass came from.
Right.
Back in the 50s.
I've got a Hofner bass. I was obsessed for a long time.
I saw a picture of you playing it. Do you still have that bass?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah?
I can't imagine I'll ever get rid of that.
Yeah. That was the first bass I cut my teeth on, actually.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Brian Malloy's dad, the guy that played drums for the track that we opened with. His dad was a bass player.
Nice.
And his dad was the first bass I got to play.
The Hofner has a fortunate history, because Paul was really just looking to cut corners and save some money.
Oh.
So he bought a cheap Hofner.
Okay.
And then put him on the map.
Wow, okay. So
just held on to it.
he made it
Nice.
Yeah.
That's about all I have, except for the fact that 1 year later than that, then the Beatle bass came out in 1957. Bill Black, who played with Elvis Presley, made the switch to electric bass. Now, I don't recall seeing him play anything but the upright, but apparently when he did that in 57, a lot of people folled suit. Not long after that.
Jamerson started on upright, didn't he?
Jamerson?
Yeah,
I don't
didn't
know.
Possibly.
he? Yeah, I've heard that, and I'm embarrassed to not be concrete about this, but I've heard that Jamerson started on upright.
You know, James Jamerson was actually a big influence on me because my mom was into Motown music. So I grew up listening to the Supremes, the Temptations, Marvin Gaye. Turns out a lot of that was his work. So he had a fantastic sense of groove. And I wouldn't be surprised to learn that he started off on the upright.
Yeah, I don't know.
So anyway, by that time, the bass was pretty well established in pop music.
Yep.
Very nice. So tell us about your bass, Aaron. What kind of bass you play?
Oh, my go-to is a Fender Jazz.
Uh-huh.
It's like a 90-something. It's a 90s Fender Jazz. It's stayed strong for many years. Works for pretty much anything I want to do. I've got the Hofner, which I really like.
Beatle bass.
Yeah, I got the Beatle bass. It's a 90. It's a 93 reissue of a 67, something like that. Or 60, or maybe it's the other way around, 97 reissue of a 63. I don't know. It's somewhere in there.
Got that violin body.
But it is a remake. It's a replica of what Paul played way back in the day.
4-string.
4-string, yeah. The Jazz is a 5-string.
Okay.
I try to do 5 strings when I can.
Ah.
But I've got the Hofner. I don't think Hofner even makes 5 strings, but it's only for Beatles. I really don't use it for much else.
Okay.
And I've got an old Alvarez from when I was a kid that I rarely play, but I keep around just in hopes that one day I'll convert it to a fretless or something, you know, or hot rod it, you know, and make it, you know, active and passive switch and all that stuff. I've got a Steinberger. Yeah. Which I got mostly to do like the 80s stuff, you know. That's the Steinberger's like the weird like no
The headless bass.
headless bass.
I
Yeah,
was
yeah,
looking
yeah,
through your
yeah.
pictures.
Yeah. So it's like a square body with no headstock.
Oh,
on
you've
it.
actually got one of those.
We've all
I've
seen
actually got
that.
one of those. So I've got like your go-to everyman's bass. That's the Fender Jazz, and then I just try to collect these unique, weird, specific.
Like a painter might for his brushes, or
Yeah, sure. So you know, I got the Steinberger initially because we were doing the Journey show, and then I realized I wanted to use it for anything else that might be, you know, 80s heavy, like Sting. Like if we ever do the Police show again, I'd like to use it for that. I use it for the Prince show, and then sometimes, man, I'll just bring it to a cover band gig because the thing sounds great.
And it looks it's a conversation piece.
And it's a conversation
very unique looking
piece.
instrument.
Yeah. It's a neat looking instrument. It's cheesy.
Where do you
I'll
turn
give it
the
that.
knobs?
Yeah. And just try to picture someone, you know, having not played that for a minute and then going to tune it and your left hand falling into nothing. You know. And anyway, and then I've got the upright. I think it's I got it so many years ago. I think the brand was Engelhart. I don't know much about upright manufacturers, honestly, but
Can't say I do either.
No.
and it's, you know, honestly, there's not much to say about it. It's just this kind of lower end. It was just something to get me by. One of these days, I hope to upgrade. You know.
But you know, it's not always about the how much you spent on it. Sometimes it's what you do with it.
Right.
Well, I'm telling you right now, I've played basses that I'm like, wow, I wish I had a better upright.
Okay, so me and Matt and Aaron, before we started this recording, we actually sat down and watched this little video on YouTube.
Oh yeah, that's right.
It was called.
You'll put a link in the show notes.
I'll put a link in the show notes. $100 version.
Look at him. He's getting the gist of this
does.
business already. Look, a
That means he's
fast
paying
learner.
attention. He's listened to the podcast before. No, you can actually look it up on YouTube. You search for $100 bass versus $10,000 bass. This guy plays a $100 bass, a $700 bass, and a $10,000 bass all in the same video.
Yeah.
And he cuts back and forth where you can kind of hear the differences between the basses. Here's my findings. Here's my opinion. I really like the sound the most from the $700 bass relative to the price.
Right. I feel like the $700 bass might have been the best bang for your buck.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're not getting as much more out of the $10,000 bass as you are
Paying more money.
paying more money.
Yeah.
But we'll put up a link, like I said. This guy's name, Davey504, is the musician.
It's pretty cool. Pretty good.
He's
playing
pretty
on
good,
that,
yeah.
too. Yeah.
He's got this other video that came on after that said 5 hours of slap.
Yeah, we didn't watch that one.
I didn't take the time to
I
check
will
it out.
never watch that.
But it was 5 hours. I checked out the video. And it showed up 5 hours in the thumbnail, him sitting there with the bass.
Oh, wow.
Some people do it, though, in a night. But regardless, I think that's pretty well covered. Let's move on to some of the hardware.
So, amps, then.
Yeah, I'm an Ampeg guy these days.
Ooh, me too.
I was doing Hartkey for a long time, and I still really like Hartkey, and I have one as my backup. But I'm really into Ampeg, and I've gone through a few different heads. They're all fine. I try to do lightweight heads just because when I have to carry them around, which
Yeah.
I mean,
The bass player always has such I mean, I guess the drummer has the most amount of crap.
Right.
But it's
right.
all like, probably
Well, it
pretty light.
depends on the gig for me, because sometimes, man, I have so much. Oh God, we could do a whole episode on just my rig alone and all the stuff I use. But yeah, like Ampeg. As far as cabs go, I pretty much stick to the classic series.
Right, yeah.
I've got a 410 and I've got an 810.
With wheels, I hope.
Yeah, the 810's in a big old case with wheels, and the 410 has 2 little wheels on it and a little railing on the back, so you can tip it over and roll it along.
Cool.
Yeah, Ampeg, Hartkey, mostly Ampeg.
I personally am kind of a naked bassist. I just plug right in for the most part, unless there needs to be some kind of fuzz or something.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you the reason why later. You probably all know this as bass players. But tell me, do you use any effects that you particularly like?
I actually use a lot of effects. Now, when I say that, I don't want to mislead and say that like I'm always fuzzing and chorusing and
trippy.
getting nuts with it. But a lot of a lot of what I do will entail like a subtle thing from time to time, and I want to speak to that a little bit because you want to be careful about using effects on bass, right?
Yeah.
Because what I've noticed a lot is trying to find a good fuzz sound or a good chorus tone or whatever can be really difficult because you'll lose a lot of your low end.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Matt and I are both nodding.
Yes. So the big thing there is, and that's when things get kind of complicated. But a lot of the pros do this, and a lot of up and comers don't know to do it. Is to split your signal.
Yeah.
So maintain a dry signal. Right? And of course they have pedals where you can mix in your dry signal and your wet signal and all that. But sometimes the pedal that I like may not have that. So just in general, I try to split my signal all the time and go to 2 places. So I'll have a wet signal and a dry signal. And so I can use any pedal I want and not have to worry about it.
You know that dry signal's got the bass end covered.
Right,
the low
right.
end
So
covered.
the dry signal will always be there, and whoever's mixing front of house will always be able to maintain that low end and not have to worry about it.
Yes.
So so front of house engineers love me, right?
You don't want a busy front of house engineer.
Yeah. You
wanna
want
set it-
yeah. It's as much as I can do on the front end, the better, right? And so there's that. I have a bass fuzz pedal that I like a lot for some stuff, but often when I want a fuzz sound, I want more of a vintage fuzz sound. And so what I find works better there is to just use a guitar pedal and go through an amp, or
Interesting.
just go through a guitar amp as my wet signal and overdrive that. So if like most of what I'm doing as my wet signal is going to be like overdriven, fuzzy, vintage tone, then often I'll just crank the amp and let it do the work for me. And I'll take some of the low end out of it so I'm not overloading a guitar amp with a bunch of low end EQ or low end frequencies. I'm a big fan of a volume pedal, and my configuration on my pedal board changes all the time, right? It's just this constant search for the right signal chain. And of course, I do all these different types of shows where I have different needs, so it's going to change up by necessity anyway. So I like a volume pedal. I've got a Voodoo Power Lab that powers everything. A tuner that comes out of the tuner out of my volume pedal so that it's always on, and I can always see if I'm flat or sharp, even if I'm in the middle of playing a song. I do chorus a good bit, just a hair of chorus usually for just to give it sort of that sheen, And anytime I'm doing 80s stuff, if I'm doing the Prince show or if I'm doing especially the Journey show or the Police, because those guys did a lot of, because everybody went chorus crazy in the 80s, right? So
yeah.
It's all over that production style. Delay. I like delay, and I rarely get to use that, but I certainly do whenever possible.
Hands down, my favorite effect.
I mean, we talked earlier about, and this is, so I'm going to give away, a little one secret off the top of my head. We talked earlier about Welcome to the Machine, right?
Yeah.
So when I do that, I'll tap in an eighth note or quarter note or whatever on my delay.
You set the tempo with your foot on this pedal.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So I use an external tap for my delay, and then set the pog to have multiple octaves, and then I recreate that weird synth bass sample that they have on there doing that.
Okay.
So it's really fun. Sometimes if you can get creative with it, you can add things that need to be there, and therefore you're more valuable than you are as just a guy playing
Just
bass.
a guy playing bass, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Which is what I was for years.
Yeah, which is what I tend to be. I tend to be just the guy playing
Yeah,
bass.
yeah, which is cool. It's just I just kind of got really into the art of
reproducing.
yeah,
tone.
reproducing tones and sounds. and
That's
things
important
like
with the
that.
Black Jacket Symphony. Though.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. So it's been fun to just kind of be in that situation that forces me to sort of go out of my comfort zone. That is just me and my bass.
Let's take a few moments to talk about instrument maintenance, like taking care of your instrument and some things that you do to. What do you do?
Yeah, make some really bad mistakes that you regret
And learn from.
and learn from them.
Okay.
I left my Hofner bass in my car for one day
Uh,
during the Alabama summer heat,
which is
and that neck came
Clean
almost completely off of the body.
no.
Yeah, wow.
It was tragic.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So
I
don't
had-
do anything.
So don't do that.
Don't do that.
Okay.
I had in talking about the Alabama summer heat, I had a bass actually sweat once.
Oh yeah.
And it had only been in my car for a couple of hours, really, but I brought it in and it was in its case, and when I opened up the case, there was all this moisture pooled around the head of it where it had been sweating, and I got a rag, wiped it off, and more moisture was coming out of the wood, and I had to wipe it.
Yeah.
Wiped it down a couple of 3 times, and then once it cooled off, it was okay, I guess? Question mark.
Okay.
But
So don't leave your bass anywhere that you wouldn't leave a 2-year-old.
right, good,
There's one.
good plan.
Yeah.
Bass strings.
I try to just get it set up every, at least every couple of years, just to not let it get too warped or to get too away from itself and it's where it should be. Just like a car, or you get regular checkups at the doctor.
Yeah.
Hopefully, and it's just sort of like that. Just make sure you're taking care of the thing. I mean,
Yeah.
and have a professional look at it from time to time to make sure nothing's going wonky.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I do that. I mean, I haven't, I guess, enough knowledge to do what I need to do, soldering and all that stuff.
Yeah,
But I still
yeah.
bring it to a guy who does it all the time. That's the guy I trust with my baby.
Right.
Strings cost a little more than guitar strings. Bass
Yeah.
strings do.
Yeah.
Are there ways that you preserve the life of your strings? Matt, you, anybody?
I don't really get too into that.
Yeah.
And also lately, for the past couple of years, I've been doing a lot of flat wound strings.
Flat wound, okay.
Yeah.
Almost a fretless sound for a fretted bass.
Yeah, it's it's closer to like what an upright bass string would be like. It's and closer to that sound. And it I believe used to be the standard decades ago. And those strings seem to last forever.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So I haven't really had to worry about it for a couple of years. And with round wounds, I've heard about boiling
Yeah.
and all that stuff.
Yeah.
I've never tried it.
Yeah.
I've talked to people that say they've had success with it. It's almost, I don't know.
I've never tried it either, and bass strings are a little more expensive, but I've never felt the need to do that other than more than I felt the need to just go buy another set of next time I'm in a guitar shop or something. It's like, well, let's just get a new set of strings. I don't think it's
and if I'm in a position where I'm broke enough to where I can't justify new bass strings, and the ones I've got are just really, really ragged, I mean, I'll just play it for one more gig and then take my paycheck from that gig and
And
get
buy some new strings.
It's pretty
You know,
important.
I would rather play a gig with old strings than go through the whole process of taking the strings off my bass, boiling them, putting them back on.
Yeah. If you can't afford a new set of bass strings, you've got problems beyond what your bass tone.
Right.
is.
Yeah. Exactly.
When I was a college kid and we were recording in the studio and I didn't have time, the studio had a kitchen. It was late at night, and my bass just sounded not that great, you know. So I decided to go ahead and boil my strings. They had a pot in the kitchen, and it was remarkable. It really sounded like a brand new set of strings.
Wow.
What happens is the heat expands and it pushes out all the crap and all the
Sure.
Yeah,
the
I've
dead
heard-
skin cells and stuff.
I
like
have
that.
heard it works. So there are
yeah.
definitely people who swear by it.
They're a little more brittle after the fact. You
Yeah.
don't want to boil a set of strings and then take it on the road. You know what I mean?
Sure, yeah.
They might snap or pop after that first boil. But when I was pretty young and hungry and it was required of me, I
Like,
did
do I
try.
really want to spend another $30 on some more?
But I thought, do I want to eat out of that pot? Should anyone eat out of that
Do you
pot
wanna eat
after
out of
I
that
boil
pot?
my
It's
strings? So, last
Wash the pot.
worst case scenario.
So I'm a composer myself, and I know you compose things as well. Oh, what is that like for you? What is the writing process for you?
Man, there are so many ways that I approach writing and composing. A lot of the time, it starts with just a nugget of something cool I figured out to do with an instrument.
Right.
You know, like I think that's a kind of a common thing. You know.
Yeah.
Maybe some little practice technique or exercise that I worked on, or a lot of the time it's some sort of more of an abstract thing, like a musical concept that I'm really interested in.
Yeah.
Right. So, and then you run into like, well, you don't want to force things.
Right. Yeah.
So for me, I try to let concepts and techniques and things become part of my vocabulary,
Right.
and let them organically happen when I compose.
Right.
As opposed to taking this cool new concept and trying to force it into something.
Yeah.
But often I'll do that too, right? Just as an exercise, see like what can I do with this thing, and then
Yeah.
you know,
That's
it may
called
just- it may just-
experimental music, and it's a thing.
Yeah, and that can be okay, and often it just turns into something that I'm like, well, that's whatever. And
That's
I'll-
what it
I'll
is,
throw
and-
it away, and
yeah.
then hope maybe it'll come back to me later in some other form or fashion.
Yeah.
But a lot of the time, I start with an idea, and then I truly do just try to let it come to me.
Yeah.
And it's, God, sometimes just nothing comes, and you have to sit there and play with it, and you have
Right.
to just put your hands on something
Yeah.
and try it. And I could go into all kinds of fun little things about music that I work into my compositions with and describing them with,
Yeah. Go into a couple of them.
Okay, so one thing I like to explore is like modal
Sure.
or modal approaches. Right?
Yeah.
So like, I may be in a major key and I'll do a minor key. I'll borrow, right? And do
Right.
like
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
parallel
Absolutely.
minor and
Modal
bar-
mixture.
Yeah, modal mixture, or like it's parallel
Yeah.
modes, and often just Ionian and Aeolian. Just
Right.
major and minor parallel, same tonal center. And I like to sometimes approach it that way. And then I'll go a step further. So if I've switched from, C major to C minor, then I'll look at now what is the new major
Right.
relative to that. So now it's E flat
Yeah.
major. Now I may borrow from that.
Right. Yeah.
And so I like to explore harmonic possibilities.
Sure.
It's a big thing I like to do.
Yeah.
A lot of the techniques I like to use involve modal interplay. Relative and parallel modes. I don't know how much you guys have delved into that yet, but
We have a little bit.
yeah. But I really enjoy exploring the possibilities of harmonic function.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which we
So,
have
this-
briefly touched on. And,
What's the relative or parallel major or minor or Dorian or whatever.
And how hard and how can we go to that and how
Yeah,
can
and
we
how
utilize
can we get there, and what's the journey we're going on, and how do I get back to where I want to go, and a lot of things like that. And often it's just an approach of lead sheet style. You know? So I may write everything out for everybody in the band. You know, it may be a strict composition and every part is thought out exactly.
Yeah.
Or I may trust my players and I want a more loose approach and I want it to be more of an organic ensemble thing. So I'll just have a chord chart with a melody.
Sure.
You know?
Yeah.
So there are a lot of different ways I like to go about how the piece is going to go from my brain to the performance.
Right. Yeah. There's always that. How much of a dictator am I? Question. You know.
Or do I really care what the keys are doing? You know.
Yeah.
Or whatever. You know?
Kind
Yeah.
of depends on how well you know the musicians or how you trust them, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. That has a lot to do with it.
Or I'll say things like, you know, I'll give the drummer a chart, and maybe some of his parts are written out because that's exactly the part I want.
Right,
But then
yeah.
sometimes I'll say, you know, play fills via, you know, a la Lars Ulrich. You know, like I have a piece of music that I've written where I just want Metallica-esque feels here, but I'm not gonna write them. Like you're the drummer.
You're the drummer. You do.
Throw a blickum, blickum, blickum.
Yeah. Blickum, 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 blickum.
Right.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool, man. Everyone has their own techniques, you know, their own approaches to composing. So I think we're going to try and ask all of our guests those questions.
Yeah. We should actually ask our listeners too. Send us what is composing like for you? How do you create music?
Another great reason to email us.
Another great reason to email. We're really coming down on you guys for not emailing us. You know, we feel so.
I'll send you guys an email.
Yeah, Aaron's gonna send us an email. Oh, that's awesome.
so lonely.
You're so lonely. Empty email box.
Well, I think we've covered a lot, gentlemen.
I think we've covered a
Yeah,
great
this has been
deal.
a lot of fun, man.
This has been a fantastic discussion. It certainly exceeded my expectations
Absolutely.
as a
Good.
bassist and as a teacher, instructor.
Yes, absolutely. And you know, if you want to check out the Black Jacket Symphony, we will have links in our show notes.
Absolutely.
Cool, yeah.
Absolutely.
All right. So last question.
Yeah.
Second to last question.
Second to last question. What wisdom / advice / parting thoughts would you like to impart to all of the aspiring bass players and aspiring musicians out there in the world?
Yeah. You know, just the obvious stuff for working in any field. Be a team player. If you're working with me, don't be the loudest guy in the room. I mean, that works for a lot of people, and I hate that that's the case,
truth, but yeah.
it's the truth. That'll,
Yeah.
but it's gonna annoy me to no end. You know, just be professional, be on time. You know, all that good stuff.
Yeah.
That seems so obvious, but please do it. You know, just please.
Yeah.
What is it? Half of any job is showing up.
Right? Yeah.
I like to
mean,
say the other
you know-
half is a good attitude. But
And the other half is a good
There's gotta be
attitude.
knowledge in there somewhere.
You know, and for me, I don't know, like dress like you give a crap.
Yeah.
You know, I've got a hard no shorts, no sandals rule personally.
I don't play in shorts at all. I don't.
Yeah. I mean, it's fine for some people, like you know,
Drum players.
if what now?
Drum players.
Yeah,
players,
drummers. You can wear whatever you want if you're a drummer.
Yeah.
And make yourself valuable, right? Like, you know, if you can sing, let people know you can sing. You know, I've hated that I'm not a better singer because it just makes me less valuable.
Yeah.
You know, I know how to find parts really, really well, and I can help other people find their parts. So that's how I make myself.
The same thing also applies, I would imagine, to, you know, if you can play a little guitar, you know,
Sure, yeah.
let people know you can play guitar. If you can
Right.
write music, let people.
I mean, I know how to do horn charts and and string quartet parts, and I know how to arrange and transcribe and generate sheet music for people. So
yeah.
I've put a lot of effort into making myself valuable that way.
Yeah, that'll make you some money. Take it from me.
Right. I mean, it took me a long time to get there, but now I'm actually finally making money doing arrangements and charts and things like that, and it's really cool.
It's my understanding you had a recent opportunity to put that to use.
Yeah.
With the Black Jacket Symphony Orchestra.
Sure, yeah. I've been doing some of that stuff with them. There are a handful of people that do that. Because you get, I mean, maybe Superman could do all that work, but I recently contributed to some of the orchestral scoring for the Sgt. Pepper show that's coming up.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah. So that was a trip, and one of the biggest challenges I've had as an arranger, for sure. But really proud to have been one of the arrangers on that. And I've done a few other things. I've done various horn charts and string charts and stuff for the band, and vocal arrangements as well. I did a few vocal arrangements for the Queen show, which was pretty intense.
That's gotta be intense.
Yeah. So to toot my own horn a little bit, I did the vocal arrangement for Bohemian Rhapsody.
Nice.
Which was quite a feat.
Yeah, man.
So
wow.
I'm pretty proud of that. It's pretty cool. And it worked out great because everybody did a great job with my arrangement, and it's just one of those proud moments of collaboration that's really cool.
So last question.
Last question.
All right.
You know what? You actually just answered it.
Okay.
It was, how do you work with other musicians?
Yeah.
And we covered being a team player, and that seems to be a reoccurring thing among a lot of the musicians we talk to.
Yeah.
And amongst ourselves.
And it's funny because you expect them to say something like, get up and do your you do your warm-ups and da-da-da-da.
Yeah. No, what they always say, be not an ass.
Not an ass. And show
in
up
one
on
way
time.
or another, that's the sentiment that gets expressed.
Because if you got this one bass player who's got the same image as you and the same talent as you, and then there's you, and you're a jerk, he's getting the call.
He gets the part.
Yep.
Absolutely. That's a great place to end it, I think.
I think so. Don't be a jerk.
Don't be a jerk.
And keep on playing bass. Don't be lame.
Don't be lame.
That's a horrible way to end this podcast. No, this really has been fantastic. We want to thank Aaron Branson again for joining us on our podcast here. It's been great talking to you, and keep on playing that bass, man. Keep it thumping.
Man, of course. Thank you so much.
Matt?
Thank you, Aaron, and stay tuned. More fun stuff coming up.
Thanks for tuning in. In fact, thanks for tuning. If there are any bassists or bass enthusiasts who would like to continue this discussion, you can look us up on social media or email us at info@musicstudent101.com.